Good evening and warm welcome to all the participants. We are extremely delighted today to have Professor Moshe Vardi with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Moshe Vardi. Welcome, sir. Good morning to you.
Namaste.
Namaste. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a very special leadership conversation. This is the 127th conversation. Professor Moshe is joining from Houston, Texas, in the United States. In spite of the hurdle of the time, it's probably around 7 a.m. there. And we are extremely thankful that Professor Moshe has arranged to join in spite of the time constraint. Thank you, sir. I'll straight away go towards making the introduction and then hand it over back to you for your opening remarks. Please allow me to share my screen. These are WiseViews leadership conversations, which we hold every Friday. And this is the 127th leadership conversation, as I mentioned. We are extremely fortunate to have Professor Moshe Vardi. How to be an ethical technologist is the theme. And in a few moments from now, this will be unfolded. This introduction followed by opening remarks for about 30 minutes by Professor Moshe. And then we'll have the Q&A for the next 40 minutes. So roughly about 75 minutes, we should be done with this leadership conversation. Stay tuned. I take it a privilege actually to introduce a very senior educationist, is a mathematician and computer scientist, Professor Moshe Vardi. I will introduce briefly a large profile, but I would love to introduce very briefly. Professor Moshe Vardi is a university professor and the Karen Ostrom George Distinguished Service Professor in Computational Engineering at Rice University in the US, where he is leading an initiative on technology, culture, and society. His interests focus on automated reasoning, a branch of artificial intelligence with broad applications to computer science, including machine learning, database theory, computational complexity theory, knowledge in multi-agent systems, computer-aided verification, and teaching logic across the curriculum. He is also a faculty scholar at the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University. He is the recipient of 3 IBM Outstanding Innovation Awards, the ACM SIGACT Godel Prize, the ACM Konalakis Award, the ACM Sigmod Cod Award, the Blaise Pascal Medal, the IEEE Computer Society Godey Award, the EATCS Distinguished Achievements Award, the Southeastern University Research Association's Distinguished Scientist Award, so on and so forth. There are many to his list. He is the recipient of several scientific awards. As I mentioned, he is a fellow of several societies and a member of several honorary academies. He is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Mathematical Society, the Asia Pacific Artificial Intelligence Association, the Association for the Advancement of AI, the Association for Computing Machinery.
Let's cut it short.
Yes. I want the audience to know the range of membership in honorary societies that you have actually secured a position. That's a matter of pride for us. Yes, it is for them to read here as well as in the communication that we send. So this is across the countries in US and Europe. He holds 9 honorary doctorates. He is a senior editor of communications of the ACM, the premier publication in computing, which is focusing on societal impact of information technology after having served for a decade as its editor-in-chief. He is the author and co-author of over 750 papers as well as 2 books. I think this is very, very important for us to know. As I mentioned, it is a fortunate opportunity for us to have such a distinguished personality with us. Once again, thank you very much, sir, for joining. I will take one more moment to introduce my esteemed colleague, Professor R. Prasad. He's the Director for Academic Wing at ICFAI Group of Educational Institutions. He brings with himself a rich experience of 3 decades as an entrepreneur, as a corporate leader, and now as an academic at ICFAI. He holds BTech from IIT Bombay and PGDM from IIM Kolkata, and he published several articles, edited books, and presented papers in various conferences in India and abroad. And we will stop sharing the screen here. And we are all ears, sir, We would love to learn from you on the theme, how to be an ethical technologist. Thank you so much once again. Kindly share your screen. And once again, thank you and welcome.
Thank you for this kind invitation, for the opportunity to address you on a topic that I find most important these days. We hear a lot about technology and ethics, so I'd like to share my thoughts with you on that, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards. I need to be able to change screens. Okay. So there's a lot of talk also about ethics in engineering. And we had a forum at RISE some time ago about the engineer's responsibility. And there were several people there, including from Exxon. And they basically say ethics is do not cheat, lie, or steal. And then at the end, after the presentation, I had a question. I said, Exxon knew about climate change already in the 1970s, and they obfuscated about it for years. I asked them to comment on the ethical dimension of that decision, not to tell us about climate change. And the panel from Exxon said, I cannot comment on that. So to me, this was a very, very narrow way of looking at ethics, and I'd like to offer you a broader perspective. So here is recently the list of the largest risk faced by the world coming from the World Economic Forum. And you can see here there are many risks, but I want in particular to point to number 5, erosion of social cohesion and societal polarization. And then number 8, widespread cybercrime and cybersecurity. So out of the 10, 2 are related to information technology, I would argue. And I'll focus in particular on polarization. And I'll take my professional association, the Association for Computing Machinery, which is worldwide the premier professional society in computing. And about a decade ago, we celebrated the Turing centenary. Alan Turing was closest to patron saint of computing. And in 2012, we celebrated his centenary. And if you go and look at the program, it's online, it's always a celebration of computing. And then you go back 5 years later, we celebrated 50 years of the Turing Award. Again, it's called the Nobel Prize in Computing. And again, you can look and everybody's talking, look at us, we're so important, we're so ascendant. And then last year in the summer, on June 10, pay attention to the date, on June 10, there was ACM celebrated its 75th birthday. Now the tone was much more sober and somber. The panelists will imagine what might be next for technology and society. Suddenly we talk about society in the years to come. And much of the meeting was about adverse societal impact of computing. And one participant, who will remain nameless here, I saw on Facebook, he put, I found the whole thing a little depressing. Why can't we just celebrate computing? But you cannot talk about computing without paying attention to recent events. So remember, June 10 was the meeting of ACM. On June 9, Congress started congressional hearing about the January 6 insurrection in 2021. And we eventually learned the President of the United States tried to subvert the lawful transfer of power in the United States. And just about 2 weeks before that, 21 people killed by a gunman in Uvalde, Texas, not too far from here. 19 children and 2 teachers were massacred by a gunman. But these 2 events, the insurrection and the massacre, reveal a very deep polarization in American society. A poll by the New York Times in the summer of 2022 about ex-President Trump, 92% of Democrats thought that he threatened U.S. democracy. 76% Republicans thinking he was just exercising his right to contest the elections. About banning assault-type weapons in the United States, again, shortly after the massacre. Among Democratic gun owners, 84% support such a ban. Among Republican gun owners, 75% object to such a ban. Depolarization. And when a country is so deeply polarized, it leads to political paralysis, and democracy is in danger because democracy is kind of a game, and we all have to trust that the game is played fairly. But when it comes depolarization, it becomes us versus them, and then democracy is in danger. And in fact, people are seriously speculating now. This is an article from just about a year ago. Will the United States break apart into red and blue confederacy? The red are the Republicans, and the blue are the Democrats. And people talk about the disunited states. And here in Texas, just in June last year, the Republican Party of Texas added to its platform a motion calling for a voter referendum on whether or not the state of Texas should reassert its status as independent nation. Just a little bit of US history. Before Texas joined the United States, for 9 years it was independent republic. And now some Republican in Texas think of, let's secede from the United States. Texit now. So what happened? And I'll take it all back to 1981. What happened in this country? I'll go back for about over 40 years. 1981. 3 pivotal events. Number one, I arrived as a young postdoc at Stanford University. I'm just joking. This is not so pivotal, but it was pivotal for me at least. But less than a month before I arrived, IBM introduced the IBM personal computer model 5150. Nobody remembered that. It was known as the IBM PC. And earlier that year in January, Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as US president. The IBM PC was a smashing business success. Just about a year after it was introduced, Time magazine usually has on its January cover the person of the year. This time it has the machine of the year. And you see the IBM PC on a desk, and a man is looking at it. He doesn't look too happy. And the PC launched a tsunami of technology. By the mid-1980s, every knowledge worker had a computer on their desk. By the late 80s, every knowledge worker brought a computer home. The web was introduced. World Wide Web was introduced in 1989. 1995, internet became commercial. Google was launched in 1998. Facebook launched in 2004. The iPhone was introduced in 2007. And today, everyone is walking with a powerful computer in their pocket. So a tsunami of technology. But we cannot ignore also what Reagan launched. Reagan launched a tsunami of neoliberalism. So neoliberalism is a very extreme form of economic market economics, laissez-faire, economic liberalization, reduction, austerity, privatization, deregulation, monetarism, tax reduction, globalization, free trade, a whole bunch of measures freeing the economy. Warren Buffett, a billionaire, already in 2006, says there is a class war, all right, class warfare, all right, but it's my class, the rich, that is making war, and we are winning. So what happened in this country? And much of what I will talk here is very US-centered, and I'll let you then bring up and think how much does it apply to India or in other countries. So here is what happened because of neoliberalism. So if you look at 4 important economic indicators: productivity, GDP, jobs, and income. You can see going back to 1953 that these 4 indicators go together. And it almost looks like economic law. So economists believe that if you just increase productivity, everything else will be taken care of. But you can see that around 1983, things start to diverge, to decouple, and productivity continued to grow, and also GDP continued to grow, but we are generating fewer jobs, and income has flattened. So a rising tide does not lift all boats. And one very stark finding is that income inequality in the United States has grown dramatically. In the early 60s, the top 1% earn about 12% of the income, and the bottom 50% earn about 20% of the income. But by 2016, there is a reversal. The top 1% earns 20% of the income, and the bottom 50% earn 12% of the income, growing inequality. And last summer, the New York Times asked all of its columnists, the people who write every week, they write some big opinion, ask them, write something, what were you wrong about? And each one had to pick a topic and write, I was wrong about X. And David Brooks, who is considered among the more conservative columnists of the New York Times, wrote, I was wrong about capitalism. And he wrote, the most educated Americans were amassing more and more wealth, dominating the best living areas, pouring advances into their kids. A highly unequal caste system was forming. Now, let's go back to technology. So what I showed so far was economic polarization. Now I want to talk about cognitive polarization. So until the 1980s, the United States has something called the fairness doctrine. So all the major TV stations were broadcast, so they had to license the spectrum from the government. There was a condition. They were supposed to cover all issues fairly. So it doesn't matter if you watch the news on ABC, CBS, or NBC, each one of them had to portray the news fairly. 1987, the Reagan administration abolished the fairness doctrine. They said, well, there are now cable channels. So you choose whatever you want to watch. We don't need to have fairness anymore. But people do not usually switch among cable channels to watch the news. They don't say, I'll watch the conservative news and I'll watch the liberal news. They stick to one channel and that's where they watch the news. And after a while, you get cognitive filter bubble. Everybody sees the news that they're comfortable with. And to that, you have to add the internet. So the roots of the internet, not just the network, but the culture, the ecosystem of the internet. When I arrived at Stanford, remember in 1981, there was something called the Well, which was a dial-up bulletin board. And there was something called Usenet, Unix to Unix network. And these were a very early social media. And the culture at the time was actually what we call the counterculture. This was the United States was coming out of the 60s. It was the Vietnam War, very traumatic, very anti-establishment. What we call now, people old enough may remember the hippies. And the mantra became information wants to be free. We don't want the government to be involved in it. Information wants to be free. So when the World Wide Web was introduced in 1989, it was about unfettered public sharing of information. It was the early days were exhilarating. But then we had a problem. How do you find information on the web? It was growing by leaps and bounds. How do you find information? So the early solution was, well, how do you find books in the library? There is a catalog. Let's build a catalog for the internet. And a company called Yahoo, that was their model. They call it a directory for the internet. Well, very quickly, Yahoo discovered it doesn't scale. The internet was the web was going way too fast to keep a catalog of everything on the internet. So by the late 90s, it became clear you need search engines. And the very early were not very good, but then Google came with a fantastically good search engine and it changed the world. But then Google had a problem. Information wants to be free. So how do you monetize? How do you make money if information is free? So they came up with a brilliant solution. How does broadcast TV work? Advertising. Newspapers are very heavily subsidized by advertising. Let's do the same, they said. They started doing advertising on the internet. But they discovered quickly that online advertising is not very effective. On newspaper, you can create large banners. On television, you have captive audience. On internet, you can always flip the page. So they have another idea, which is micro-targeted advertising. We will target the advertisement to each person individually. But that meant they need lots of personal data. So they started from very early on, they started using machine learning to learn about the users and show them advertising and content based on their own preferences. But that means that the internet that you see and the internet that I see are not the same. We see different internets and we created even more bigger filter bubbles. And then when social media came, Facebook is free. So what is their goal? Their business model again is advertising. And in fact, they said their goal is to maximize user engagement. So the goal is to keep you hooked on Facebook. And they went from micro-target advertising to nano-targeted. They know about each person huge amount, and they show you the content they think you would want to see. And this become addictive, and this has become known as addiction by design. An article from a decade ago by The Atlantic, with an anthropologist's examination of Las Vegas slot machine, this reveals about the hour we spend on social networks. We have addiction by design. So when I look at the situation of the world today and what technology has done to the world, I'm reminding of a science fiction novel that I read in 1985 when my son was a teenager and he was hard to talk to, so I read his book so we can talk about the books. And Ender's Game, it's a novel from 1985, and spoiler alert, the story is of a teenage boy. He and his friends think they're playing a video game, but in reality, they're fighting intergalactic war. When they think they won the game, they actually won a war and they've destroyed the civilization. And I think this is a good metaphor for what technologists find themselves today. We thought of ourselves into Star Wars metaphors. We thought of ourselves as the Rebel Alliance, but we are the Empire. So what do we do now? So the ACM Code of Ethics, here is the first sentence. computing professionals' actions change the world. To act responsibly, they should reflect upon the wider impact of their work, consistently supporting the public good. So how to be an ethical computer scientist, how to be an ethical technologist, start by supporting the public good. And when I talk to students about it, they're actually very open to this. They says, I have a degree in computer science, my skill will be in high demand. It will be easier for me to choose a job in a company that is ethical rather than a company that's unethical. Now, when I start talking about the public good, some people accuse me of being Marxist-Leninist. So I want to remind you, how does the US Constitution start? With the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. The purpose of the United States is to promote the public good. The Constitution is a mechanism by which we collectively reach some agreement. What is the public good? We have multiplicity of opinions. How do we agree what is the public good? That's hard. That's why we have the Constitution for. But the purpose of the Constitution is in the first paragraph, promote the public good. And particular for, I'm a computer science educator. If I educate students and they come out of Rice University without social responsibility, then I have not been supporting the public good. So it is my social responsibility to educate students so they will become socially responsible. And I argue that this is true not just for computer science. This is true for business students. This is true for all technologies and business students, and even law students. Everything that ICFAI stands for, you need to think. The student must come out with social responsibility. And I encourage you to look at the paper that I wrote with my colleague 2 years ago called Deep Tech Ethics, where we describe how we teach ethics to computer science students at Rice. And I would like to propose that technologists would take a Lovelacean oath. Ada Lovelace was a 19th century mathematician. He's considered to be the first programmer. She started writing program for Charles Babbage analytic machine. And there is a exchange of letters between her and Charles Babbage. And Charles Babbage was an entrepreneur. He just wanted to make money. But she wrote to him, I wish to add my might towards expounding and interpreting the Almighty and his laws and works for the most effective use of mankind. That is, for the public good. So I propose an oath for technologies, the same way the doctor takes the Hippocratic oath. Technologists would say, I solemnly pledge always to reflect upon the wider impact of my work, consistently supporting the public good. Let me try to conclude with some observation. Edward O. Wilson, a very noted biologist, died 2 years ago, and he wrote, the true problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institution, and the technology of gods. And I will rephrase it in my own language. I would say today's technology is taking advantage of our Paleolithic emotions and medieval institutions. About 4 years ago, together with colleagues in Europe, we launched the Digital Humanism Initiative, and we wrote the Vienna Manifesto on Digital Humanism. And I'll read to you one sentence from this. You can find it on the web. We must shape technology in accordance with human values and needs instead of allowing technology to shape humans. Human-centered technology, human-centered innovation. The slogan at the top, don't be driven by technology, drive it. I really borrowed it from BMW. BMW used to have the slogan, the ultimate driving machine. But now they are threatened by autonomous vehicles. So the new slogan is don't be driven by technology, drive it. I think this is a good metaphor for society. We should not be driven by technology, we should drive technology. And I'll finish with a paragraph from the Talmud, the Jewish old text. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obliged to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And I'll close with that, and I welcome your comment.
That's amazing, sir. That's an amazing account of how the technology, computer scientists, and the world, especially with the examples of United States that you have given, have evolved over the last 4 decades. I think it's a huge landscape that you have covered in terms of the origins beginning from computing machines to the additional aids of internet, and how the policies of various governments, neoliberalism, the free market capitalism, how these have actually shaped and an avalanche of impact that we have seen on various fronts on human lives, human behaviors, and the way we get addicted to the machines. I think it's a huge canvas that you have painted. Thank you so much, sir, for taking the pains to establish your argument for digital humanism initiative, right from talking about the history, how it evolved, and eventually how it is impacting us. I think most of the points that you have mentioned needs greater deliberation. Definitely, we would like to go over this. Before we conclude, just in case I forget, I wanted to mention now that kindly email your presentation. We'll have to go and study that presentation much beyond this leadership conversation as well, sir. I'm sure I'll request you to make that email if you have no problem on sharing it with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I want to also, at this point in time, thank all the participants who have joined from different parts of the country. Several leaders have joined from various sectors like education, media, technology, people joining from fields like FMCG as well, joining from core technology, infrastructure, apart from education technology. I think we have all leaders who have joined this year. Thank you so much for this continued support that you have been lending to us. We will begin the Q&A now with Professor Moshe Vardi, and this Q&A will last for about 40-45 minutes. I'll request you to wait for the second cluster. The first cluster will be taken up by Professor Prasad, and I'll come back for the second cluster. And if we have time, I think if you raise your hand, we will open the mic for you in the second cluster. Once again, thanking you, sir. And I request Professor Prasad to start cluster number 1. Over to you, Professor Prasad.
Thank you, Professor Sudhakar. Thank you, sir, for opening up such a vast landscape in an area which we get hit only after we get hit. We understand what has happened. And the landscape is so large that perhaps many of my questions will go into trying to connect and, kind of look at certain issues, though there are far more many questions. So let me start with the first question, sir. We use the term technologist, and there are many in the audience who may not consider themselves technologists. So what do we mean by that word in this context? Is it limited to technologists alone, or there are other roles and they also need to be ethical about it? Where does ethics come in? So this is the first question, sir.
So there is that's why I put the last quote from the Talmud, which is that, we live in a society. And I think one of the most destructive sentences that was ever expressed by a politician was the one by Margaret Thatcher, saying there's no such thing as society. And it kind of basically says you can be selfish and it's okay. It's good to be selfish. There was a famous movie in the United States, 1987. It was called Wall Street. And it popularized the phrase, greed is good. And this is part of the fallacy of, I think, of neoliberalism, that greed is good. So the answer is that if you want to live ethical life, first you need to take care of yourself. I mean, I call it the oxygen mask principle. If you don't take care of yourself, you cannot take care of other people. So I'm not saying everybody needs to be Mother Teresa and take a vow of poverty and just decide that's what I'm going to do. But at the same time, if you're only take care of yourself, what kind of a person are you? So we are social animals, okay? We live in society. We cannot exist. Anybody who thinks they can exist without society, it's an illusion. You cannot live. I go outside and I drive on the road. Why are the roads outside? The answer is society has decided that we need to build infrastructure. And so I think one of the things we have not done, in my opinion, and maybe it's different in India, but I look at what happened, for example, at Rice University, and only very recently we started talking to students about their social responsibility. And Rice is an elite school. We admit very, very brilliant students. We give them fantastic education. But then we say, okay, just go have a great career. and without telling, you're very fortunate to have been at Rice. Go have a great career, absolutely. But be responsible for society. And in fact, what happened, we used to have nobility. But the nobility knew that they are privileged. And they did fail. There was something called noblesse oblige. There was a responsibility of the nobility. They felt some responsibility. Now we have meritocracy, and people say, well, I earn everything due to my own merit and I'm not responsible. And I think this has been very destructive to society. So this philosophy that we all need to balance our own narrow interest with interest of society, that is applicable to, I think, to all of us. All of us need to think, you know, when eventually, as far as I know, every human being is going to die. And we should all ask, okay, what have we left for the world? What has been our contribution to the world? Have we made the world a better place? Betterment of the world, we can take it as a value. And I think this value applies to everyone. And as the Talmud says, you know, it's a huge task to try to make the world a better place. It's a huge task, okay? None of us is going to be able to, you know, very few of us can change the world in a significant way all by ourselves. But we each can make our own small contributions, okay? There is something called the voting paradox. So we just had the election here in Texas. And I went to vote. And you can ask, why did you go to vote? I had to invest about an hour of my time. Was this a good investment of my time? My overall impact is tiny. So if you do the cold economic analysis, because my contribution is so small, I should not waste an hour of my time. Nevertheless, I did go to vote, because we all understand if we don't go to vote, then there's going to be democracy is going to fail. So why do we vote? And the answer, we vote because of some sense of social responsibility, not because it serves our interest. Because if you do the cold calculation, it does not serve your interest to vote. But we all decide to pitch in and vote in order to maintain democracy. And that's an example. Again, we don't quite we tell them it's your civic responsibility to vote. But now we have the younger people in the United States vote less and less. They said, why should I waste my time? I'm having such minuscule impact. So I think the concept of social responsibility applies to everyone in our society. But in particular, you know, I mean, you're presenting educational institution, the people whom you graduate, these are the elite of the country. And in particular, it's very important that they have a sense of social responsibility.
Fantastic, sir. I think you've broadened the horizons of the discussion of, you know, technologist ethics. And from here, I'd like to go into the next query, which is about one of the initiatives that have been mentioned in your CV. This is about technology, culture, and society. Now, all these together also have a role to play in how we go forward and make impact in what we need to do. What are the principles that one has to go with? You have mentioned some points like, you know, public good, social responsibility. In a way, you've mentioned purpose also. You brought in the Talmud, you mentioned purpose too. So what are the basic principles that we need to keep in mind as human beings beyond this? This you have covered to some extent, but what would you like to present above that, so that whenever we are faced with a situation, we have some light guiding us with respect to these principles?
So I'll give you an example, a conversation I had just very recently with a PhD student of mine, ex-PhD student. And I told her two very important principles for me personally in my life. One, I feel that I'm 100% responsible for my emotions. So very often we say, this person made me angry. And there are lots of things to get angry about. I mean, the world is very imperfect, okay? There are a lot of things to get angry about. And people say, oh, this person made me angry because he or she this or that. And I said, nobody makes you angry. People do things, but every time you get angry, it's your decision. It's always your decision. You are 100% responsible for your own feeling. You could have made the decision not to get angry. And one of my friends challenged me and said, no, but it's somebody else's conduct is the reason. I said, okay, suppose I tell you you're an idiot. Would you get offended? He said, absolutely, I'll get offended. Good, I said. Now suppose you go to a pet store and there is a parrot. And the parrot says, "You're an idiot, you're an idiot, you're an idiot." Will you get offended? It said, "Of course not. It's a stupid parrot." I say, "You see, you decided when to get upset, when not to get upset. It's all at the end, you're responsible for this." But then I told my student, the fact that everyone is responsible does not mean that I can be inconsiderate of their feelings. We know that human beings have feelings, okay? So even though if I tell my friend that he's an idiot, and I know that, and it's likely he'll get upset, I can say, well, it's his problem. No, I'm also responsible for my own actions. So we live in a world where on one hand, people are responsible for their own attitude, but it doesn't absolve other people from being considerate. The two things go together. And so I would take this and say, look, we don't control the world. Many things happen, but we cannot ignore our impact on the world. And that to me is that if you go back to the ACM Code of Ethics, it says, committing professional develop technology. This technology will have wide impact on the world, and they must consider that impact. And this is true. This is true, I think, for everybody. Some in a bigger way. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has bigger impact on the world than I do. Okay, I wish he would think about the wider impact of what he's doing, of his business decision. But this is true for every human being. What is your impact on the world? And I said, I happen to be very privileged. I'm a professor. I give talks. Many people listen to me, so I have more responsibility. The person who comes to clean my office has less impact on the world. This is the reality we live in. But each one of us always must consider not just ourselves, but our impact on the world. Starting from the people around us and thinking also about the world at large. That to me is the most fundamental principle. That's what I call social responsibility. Okay, you're not operating in a vacuum. I mean, we've seen people, we know, each one of us know people who are narcissistic. They only think about themselves. And we don't have many friends like this because we don't want friends like this, because you want around you people who do think about you also. So being responsible for our actions and their impact on society, that to me is the most fundamental principle.
Excellent, sir. Two guiding lights. One is about oneself and how one is responsible for one's own emotion. And the second is taking responsibility for the work that one does, whether it's in thought, action, or deed, or words, on the impact that it makes to others. While this can be relative, it certainly needs to be considered if one wants to make a contribution to ethics. I move on to the next question. Very briefly, this slide came up. What are the important categories of risk that impact people in the use of technology? You did point out to two of them. Can you delve a little more on this subject, sir?
So, look, I mean, if I look at, first of all, at our society today, our biggest risk today is climate change, by far. Okay, we just went through the hottest summer in history in Houston. We had about almost 5 months where the temperature daily were in the around 38 degrees for 5 months. It was really a very unpleasant summer. And then I hear on an interview on the news, and he said this was the hottest summer on record, but probably the coolest summer for the next 100 years. And I think, oh my God, this may be the coolest summer for the rest of my life. Okay. And so this is the biggest thing that I think, and it's all a result of technology. So we started this, our big discovery, one of the most profound discoveries of all time, has been the discovery of carbon-based energy. I mean, if you just look at how we live today to how we lived just 200 years ago, there's no comparison. And the thing that happened, energy became much, much cheaper than it used to be, dramatically cheaper than it used to be. And we discovered energy. This was the big discovery. But we did it at the cost of putting carbon in the atmosphere. And now we're living with the consequence of that. And that's kind of number one. Computers made things, let's go closer to home for me. I'm information technologist. Computer made things convenient. And so it seems that we should just maximize convenience. In fact, Facebook had the slogan, frictionless sharing. And we kind of think of friction as a bad thing. You know, there's friction, let's eliminate friction. But imagine, you know, we have the engineering quadrangle, and across from us, on the other side of the quad, I have the mechanical engineering department. And imagine that I go to my mechanical engineering colleagues and I tell them, you know, in computer science, we are against friction completely. We want to eliminate all friction. You guys should do the same. You should eliminate all friction. They will look at me and says, you're crazy. Friction is sometimes a problem. You know, you have to have the right amount of friction at the right amount of time in the right place. So if I look at the car, at the automobile, I have the drive shaft. I want to eliminate friction there. But the tires on the road, of course, I want friction between the tire on the road. Without friction, the car doesn't go. So they don't think of friction as a problem. They think friction is, whether friction is good or bad, is context dependent. You have to think about each context to say, do I want friction or do I want not friction? We have not developed this sensibility when it comes to information technology. We just say friction is bad, eliminate all friction. And some years ago, I noted that my parents were still alive. The boss, blessed be their memory, the boss passed away. But I came, you know, in 1991, I came to the United States. And we used to correspond. I would write letters to them, and they would write letters to me. And when I write a letter, it would take 2 weeks before it gets there. And then I get their response 2 weeks later. So a month passed. And then I write a new letter, and a month passed, and I have something to write about. And then email came, and we started corresponding by email. By email arrived almost instantaneously, or even with the time difference, it's 1 day. And not much happened in 1 day that I can write an interesting email every day. So the correspondence I had between my parents just went away. I stopped corresponding with my parents. I would just write, okay, something happened, but just reflect. And I lost one of the things that letter did. You reflect, okay, what happened in the past months? You have some reflection for your life, on your own life. The letter was not just for themselves, useful to me to reflect on what happened in the past month. And once email arrived, it went away. We stopped corresponding. We would talk on the phone, but it was not the same reflective. How are you doing? Everything is okay. Everything is okay. You know, it was not as reflective as letters. And, you know, there are famous, you go back in history, and there are famous exchange of letters that you find sometime. And we read today letters that people have exchanged, you know, hundreds of years ago. And today it's all gone. We don't have this kind of letter exchange anymore. And that's because we eliminated the friction. And we made email so easy to send that we're all drowning in email. I simply cannot keep up the email I'm getting. And then we're drowning also in spam. And in fact, people proposed some years ago, imagine that each email would cost you, you know, one penny, 1 rupee, okay? Each email. Well, for me, it will be, okay, let's suppose that I send 100 email per day, okay? It would cost me maybe $1. It's okay. But people who send spam, who send millions of email, if they have to pay 1 penny, 1 cent per email, it would not be spam. That's the way to kill spam, because email is free. There's too much email. So that's an example of that we need to think, okay, yes, technology is great. I mean, I can point to many, many benefits of technology, but our thoughtless way of putting technology forward has not always made the world a better place. And that's now with it, I think the important thing is, first of all, you know, it's well known that people have like addiction problems, for example, alcoholism. The first step, there is something called the 12th step, and I'm not an expert on the 12th step or whatever it's called, but the first step I know is you admit that you have a problem. This is the first step. I think with technology, we have to admit we have a problem. Technology is great, but it has all kinds of adverse societal impact. Let's accept responsibility. Then we can start the conversation. Where do we go from here? There's no easy way. We cannot, you know, as we say, the genie goes out of the bottle. It's how to put the genie back in the bottle. It's impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. But how do we manage our life more responsibly with technology? That's a conversation that we must have.
Absolutely, sir. You have highlighted the two critical points. One is about climate change, which I think each of us can impact in the daily actions that we take. We need to be a bit more reflective about it. And certainly technology is involved, goes beyond technology to users like us. And the second one is about computing, where you made 2 points. One is about convenience and the other is about correspondence and its impact, and the kind of loss of value that we see by not paying attention to basic principles such as this. We take them as positive values, but we don't contextualize them for the times and for the headway that this whole technology has made. And we need to be far more cognizant, be aware first, so that we are able to measure and then take steps. Thank you very much, sir, for highlighting these 2 points. I now come to a question where, in today's world, we keep reading about this, we keep seeing, and so everybody rushes in. And there is this knowledge awareness matrix. There are many things that we don't know that we don't know, and particularly true of technology, where we start realizing some of these things as they happen. So there's a rush to deploy technology such as AI. Individuals want to learn it, deploy it. Institutions, companies want to do it. How can such a rush be governed, made responsible?
I have a solution that is the industries, the reaction I got from industry are very negative, but I still think it's not a bad solution at all. So if you look at technology, and again, this is definitely true in the United States, and you can tell me it's also true in India. When it comes to technology, there are two legal systems. And if there are legal scholars on the audience, I'd love to hear their perspective on it. There are two legal systems. One is the normal legal system, where the laws are passed by legislatures. In the United States, we have state laws and we have federal laws. And they're passed democratically. And as Churchill says, democracy is the worst form of government, except for everything else. It's very imperfect. We all know it, but it's the best we have right now for marshalling our collective will, okay? But then when it comes to technology, there is a shadow legal system. And what is the shadow legal system? It's called click-through contracts. Every time you use technology, there is a license. And you click through and you agree to the license. None of us ever read the licenses. For example, when I bought this, I have a Windows machine. The Microsoft license that I agreed to has 15,000 words. The New York Times calculated that if you try to read all the licenses for technology that you use in a year, you're going to spend 2.5 months just reading licenses. So, and in the name of convenience, eliminating friction, we just have to click. So it's very easy. So human tendency is, okay, take, what is it? 15,000 words is about 20 pages of thick legalese. It will take me a whole day just to read Microsoft license. Okay, maybe even more than one day to read and understand it. Or I have another option, just click. Of course, people will click. That's the way it is designed. And so what is in all these licenses that we sign? Who knows? But now let's suppose that something happens, that I'm harmed by, let's suppose I claim that I'm harmed by Facebook, and I want to take Facebook to court. Facebook will pull out the license and says, you have signed away, you have agreed to absolve us from all liability. Every such license contains a waiver of liability. So right now we have an industry that is immune from liability. So imagine you had car companies and they somehow got immunity from any liability. What do you think will happen? How safe the car will be if they will be immune from liability? So there is a simple measure we can take. We can pass a very simple law that would say that click-through contracts, past, present, and future, are hereby null and void. And it's okay for the state to do it because I talk about this, the neoliberalism. So a neoliberalist believe in the free market, and they think the state should stay away. The state should not get involved in the market. But this is propaganda. This is not reality. The market cannot exist without the state. Why? Because what are the two pillars of the market? One is property rights. The law defines property rights, and the state enforce property rights, okay? If I go to a store and I find a shirt that I like and I take it without paying for it, the state will come after me because I took away something that's not mine. The state enforces property rights. The second pillar of the market is contracts. You can't have a market without contracts, okay? I go to the restaurant, I eat first, and then I pay later. And I can say I don't want to pay. And they say, but you ate. It's an implicit contract that if you eat in the restaurant, then you must pay. And who enforces it? The state enforces contracts. Therefore, to think that the state should have no say that any two contracts are valid, any contract signed willingly is valid, it's not true. For example, when I bought my house in the 90s here in Texas, there is something called the deed, which is the bill of property. And the terms of my property rights were created when in the 1950s, when this was agricultural land and it was changed purpose into housing. And there they wrote the Bill of Rights. And in Texas in the 1950s, we still have Jim Crow's law. We have discrimination against blacks. And my property right says, the bill of property says, I'm not allowed to sell the house to colored people. Now, in the 1960s, we passed the civil rights legislation in the United States, and all such contracts were declared to be null and void. So even though it's still written in the contract that I signed to buy my house, it is null and void. I'm allowed to sell my house. Good God, I'm allowed to sell my house to colored people. Anybody, okay? There are no more. This has been disallowed. So the state does have a say. United States, I'm not allowed to sell my kidney. They decided that it will be, the people who will sell their kidneys are going to be poor people. So this is not allowed. It's illegal to sell kidneys. Again, I can sign a contract, it's null and void. So the state should have a say in contracts. And we need contracts to govern our digital life. But the law should be passed by legislatures and not written by corporate lawyers that in the dark. And right now there is a rush to AI, and partly there is a rush because this is an industry that says if bad things happen, what's the problem? You know, many people have played with ChatGPT, and before you can use ChatGPT, you click through the license and you have not read it. But I'm sure it says they are absolved of any responsibility, they have no liability. So the companies have no reason to say, wait a minute, slow down. We have to see that this is safe. Why should they do that? You have weighed any claims against them. So if we want to have more responsible industry, first we have to take away their secret weapon, click-through contracts, and then they'll be governed by normal laws. And if they think more laws are needed, good. Let's start a discussion about what laws are needed. But right now, this is very unsafe technology, and it's unsafe by design, because without liability is no accountability. Without accountability, there's no safety.
Fabulous, sir. I think you've gone for the jugular.
It is a jugular for them. It is jugular. They have been living now for decades with this blanket immunity. It's time to pull the blanket away.
I think you've highlighted the point, and I'm sure that a lot of members in the audience will be cognizant of it when they deal with technology, as well as give a bit more importance to the state and foster the state to do something which is relevant here. Thank you, sir. We are at about 7:29. I have more questions, but I'm handing it back to Professor Rao.
Thank you so much for your patient responses till now. I think this is a very, very important and current theme that we are dwelling upon. I'm sure members in the audience are enjoying in rapt attention about the responses, about the construct of blanket immunity versus role of the state in enacting legislations to actually push away the click-through contracts. It's an amazing solution that you have presented. We'll take this forward. I have many questions, but I'll just choose one or two And in the meantime, I request the members in the audience to raise their hands so that I go to them and enable a direct discussion with Professor Moshe. You can keep raising your hands and I will now take one or two questions. Sir, like we have green, yellow and red light for traffic signals, is there any equivalent yellow for ethical technologies, ethical technologists? How do you handle it and how to demarcate ethical, unethical, technical practices? This is one question that a member of the audience wanted to understand from you.
So because this has been an industry that is unregulated and unliable, we have fallen way behind in thinking even about these issues. So what happened is some of these companies, they try to do what we call virtue signaling, or some people call it even more blatantly ethics washing. So just for public relations reasons, they said, oh, we are very ethical. So they have like sometimes ethics council, and they put together some council of important people and say, you're our ethical board. But ethic doesn't mean anything unless you're willing to pay the price. I would like to see a company that would say, this could be a huge market for us, but we are not going there because we think it's unethical. I've yet to see it. Just to give you an example, in 2022, in the summer of 2022, an important person from Microsoft gave a public talk about how Microsoft handled this kind of ethical responsibility, and how when there is a new business proposal for a new technology, they evaluate it and they decide whether it fits with their values and whether they should do it or they should not, in a very deliberate process. And then in November, I think it was November, just about a year ago, ChatGPT came about. And suddenly Microsoft realized that they have fallen behind in AI technology. And then they rushed in. They made a huge investment in OpenAI. They said, we cannot be left behind. And all this deliberate process, we are going to go and evaluate technology and decide whether it's ethical and decide is it going to be responsible to use it, all fell by the website. It was profits first. They saw a risk to the profitability of the company and they rushed in. Google has a webpage about responsible AI, but every time they are inside Google, people who start to criticize the company, they're shown the door. Okay, so we have not developed, and remember, there is no regulatory framework for this. So one of the things that, for example, when I buy every energy product, I get some sticker on it that says how energy efficient it is. And all of this is regulated. There is some regulatory agency that tells them, okay, this is what you need to put in. So some people are saying, some important people are saying, and I tend to agree with them, that we need a regulatory agency for AI in particular. So if you take comparison to another technology, in 1908, the Ford Model T rolled off the manufacturing line. It was not the first automobile. First automobile, in fact, was 50 years earlier in Europe, but it was the first mass-produced, mass-consumed automobile. And within a decade, people realize this is wonderful technology, incredibly convenient. You can go much faster and much farther than you can go with horses. Before that, it was horse and buggy. You can go much faster, but people get killed. Automobiles and people don't mix well together. Automobiles and automobiles don't mix well together. And they created, in the United States, the National Transportation Safety Board. It's an agency that it was created, I think, in the 1920s. 100 years later, it's still an important agency and established all kinds of rules about cars, okay, including safety standards. Safety standards, it turned out, are not very good sales feature, okay, because mostly it's absence of something. I know of one automobile that have made safety a selling feature, and that's Volvo. People buy Volvo because Volvo has a reputation of a very safe car. But when I bought my car, it does not have a special reputation for safety. Nevertheless, I bought it with I was not very worried when I bought it, because I know that they have to meet government standards. And the government does simulate collision, and they establish safety standards for automobiles. And that made me feel, when I bought my car, I'm okay. It is not exceptionally safe, but it meets government standards. We don't have safety standards for AI. And so we don't even have a culture of safety there. Because remember, we're an industry that for the past 75 years, there was no liability and friction was bad. In fact, Facebook motto used to be move fast and break things, okay? So we're not liable, so just move fast, okay? If you don't move fast, somebody else will move fast. So we need to start thinking, this is technology with consequences. It's like automobile. It's very, very convenient, but there are consequences. Let's start and let's regulate it. Let's learn how to regulate it. We still don't have, if you look, there are people, you find them in law school or sometimes in business school, who specialize in regulatory science, how to regulate industry well. Because regulating industry is like raising children. If you have children, you can under-regulate them and let them do whatever they want, and then they're likely to do very dangerous things. I know, because I did as a child very dangerous things. Or you can, it's a miracle that I'm still alive. Or you can over-regulate them. But if you over-regulate them, they don't learn how to make decisions. They don't learn to take responsibility for the decision. They don't learn from their mistakes. So raising children well, is every parent knows, is a difficult search for the balance. It's all about the balance. The same thing will be regulating industry. We want industry to be creative. The one thing you can say about capitalism, it's very, very creative. And we need to figure out how to regulate it just the right amount, not too much and not too little. It's all about the balance. And so if we want to have what would it mean to have safe AI? It's time for us to go back and think, okay, how do we regulate AI? How do we create safety standards? Who should do the regulation? We don't have any. Who's doing the regulation right now? We don't have anyone to do that. And so this is something we need to start thinking now. It's a very, very powerful industry. It can do lots of good, lots of damage, lots of harm. Let's start thinking about how to be responsible technologists.
Fantastic, sir. Thank you very much for this overview. Often we see ethical window dressing by many large corporations, as you mentioned, with the examples of Microsoft and Google and various other organizations. But we are yet to see an organization which is willing to pay a price for making an ethical decision and keeping it in public domain for making that decision. I'm sure this is what is to be regulated. Regulations are required, and responsibility means regulation, and we need to nurture the industry with these regulations being brought in place. And that also means safety. Regulations is accountability. Accountability is safety. I think we are consistent in that thread of conversation that we have been having over the last 45 minutes.
I want to add another comment to that, which is we need to hold people responsible. What do I mean by that? I have, for example, there are very well-known, very prominent people, for example, working for Facebook. And they're working for Facebook, a company that I think has caused a lot of damage. I mean, this is documented. In fact, it's documented because we had the Facebook paper that were leaked out. And the Facebook paper leaked out about 2 years ago, and they revealed that Facebook itself knew about the societal damage it was creating, including there is evidence that the mistreatment of the Rohingya people in Myanmar was amplified by Facebook. And you never saw the people who work for Facebook, and many of them are luminaries. I don't want to mention them by name. They are luminaries. And they are looking at the damage that Facebook did. And they're not saying, well, I'm responsible for that. They take no responsibility. They probably are paid fairly well by the company. And, we had one case, Jeff Hinton was considered a luminary of artificial intelligence, and he resigned a few months ago in May, he resigned from Google after working for 10 years because he's worried about the consequence of artificial intelligence. But he worked for 10 years at Google before that, where much of the damage was already done by Google in terms of polarization. And I've never seen, not just they don't hold themselves responsible, society does not hold them responsible. I cannot imagine that we will take someone who working for tobacco industry and give them awards for being technology leaders. People would say, no, this is incompatible with our values to take someone who works for the tobacco industry. I know tobacco industry is legal, but none of us think the tobacco industry is serving the public good. We just think that that making it illegal is going to cause more damage, so we have to tolerate it. But no one will take a technologist from the tobacco industry and give them awards for technology. And yet we do it with technologies, with information technologies. We give them awards, they're luminaries. And I think we need to hold these people to a higher ethical standard. They cannot say, oh, well, it's not me, I did not make the business decision. If you are working for that company, then effectively you are endorsing what this company is doing. We need to hold people responsible.
Yeah. Great. The additional point is the big guys should be having a bigger responsibility, and they should be held and tested at the altar of responsibility for the society. I think several examples that you mentioned, both corporations as well as society will have to hold them responsible and accountable for the contribution that they have made towards adverse technology that can impact us so adversely. So we move to the next question with your permission. That is, while there is regulation and everywhere, the collapse of FTX is what is being talked about. There was a scam reported in FTX despite regulation. What could be the solution in such situations?
So first of all, FTX happened. One is that, it doesn't matter how well we regulate things. There is, I call it there is something called Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law says if anything can go wrong, it will. And I have an amendment for that. Anything that human beings can do, someone will do. So we still have, there are laws and people break the laws. So we will always have, what we learn now about FTX, it was just plain fraud. And people will commit fraud because they're greedy, and doesn't matter how much we pass laws, people will break the laws. This is the reality. Think of the biblical story of the flood. God gets upset because humanity does not behave well, and he decides to destroy humanity. And he saved one family, Noah, and then he said, you know what? I give up. I'm not going to do it again. I know that you're going to misbehave. I will just have to live. I'll have to learn to live with that. So unfortunately, people will break laws. However, overall, crypto is underregulated. And underregulated in two ways. One, in particular, the model of crypto, which is would you create money by proof of work. It means you create, suppose there's something of value by burning fossil fuel. And given the reality of climate change, to me, this is just utterly irresponsible. We should just ban crypto that is based on proof of work. Basically, to say, I will create money by putting more carbon in the atmosphere. That's the model. And this is just as utterly insane. And in the name of laissez-faire, we let that happen. And this is just, we are all socially irresponsible. Right now, our biggest threat is climate change. So crypto should be just banned, okay? I cannot understand how we let it go. Beyond that, there are debates whether, one of the issues that we have seen now, in fact, you have to remember in history, especially in the United States, we had two major financial crises in the last 25 years. One was around 2000, was a dot-com crash, and around in 2008 was the financial crisis. We know that both of them happened because of under-regulation of the financial markets. In fact, that was one important lesson. In fact, Alan Greenspan who was the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank in 2000, he was shocked because he believed that markets are self-regulating. And we learned that markets are not self-regulating. And one of the most important things for markets is the money supply. How much money is there in the market? And this is where the Federal Reserve Bank, they're responsible for managing the money supply. Not too much, not too little. You have too much money supply because inflation. Too little because deflation. How to find the right balance. And suddenly we're going to let crypto decide how much money there is in an economy. And this is one of the most important economic measures. If you look today, how do we regulate the economy overall? The main thing is money supply. And now we're letting the people who are doing crypto mining in China decide how much money there is in the economy. So crypto is underregulated. And I said there are two different issues here. One is proof of work, which is the prevailing model, should be just banned outright because it's damaging to the planet. There is also proof of ownership, proof of stake. Now it's a different discussion, but again, I think that crypto is underregulated dramatically. FTX was just plain fraud, and fraud will continue to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, we take the point. Crypto should be burnt. But sir, I'm intrigued over the last several minutes of discussion. I'm quite intrigued how a computer scientist, how a deep tech scientist is talking about a deep sense of social responsibility. And where did this trigger from? I'm sure we are all supposed to be, I agree with you, we are supposed to be socially responsible, but the world is not like that. Neither the society nor the corporations are responsible enough visibly, demonstrably. In the light of this observation, I have one question, and after that, I'll open the mic for others to ask you the questions directly. Can you tell us your personal experience about a time that you faced an ethical dilemma in your professional life? This is the question that we wanted to have your response for, sir.
So, to me personally, when I think of ethics, one of the main, I go back to biblical ethics, all the way to the Bible. And the Bible, when you see the Bible talk about ethics, it always talked about protect the weak, defend the weak. And who was the weak? For example, the Bible, you find a lot. The Bible talks about widows and orphans, because this was a society that was a paternalistic society. It was very male-dominated society. And widows were suddenly left without the protection of a man. And very often they couldn't necessarily make a living. So the Bible talks a lot, protect the widows and the orphans. So to me, ethics start with protect people who are weak in our society, and they don't, relatively weak. And when I give a longer version of this talk, I tell such stories how I have opportunities in my life to stand up for the weak. For example, this is 30 years ago, or more than that, 35 years ago. I had an employee who did work that I thought was very good. And our department manager, now my manager for some reason did not like the work, and he wanted me to tell the employee that the work is not good. And I said, I cannot do that. I believe the work is good, and I would not tell him that the work is not good. And I stood up to my manager, and I took a risk, because my manager could say, well, it's your job to do it, and if you cannot do your job as a manager, I'm going to remove you as a manager. But I said, I will not tell this is good work. I will not say that the work is not good. And my manager decided that this will be a big conflict, will not serve his interest as well. And he said, okay, you decide how to manage him. And so he backed off. He found a way to diffuse the situation, because I was clearly defying him. And I took a risk, but I could not in good faith go and tell my employee the work is not good. In fact, about 25 years later, that work won an award. So that I was right at the time. The work was very good. It took 25 years before the work won an award. The work was good. And unfortunately, my manager has passed away since. So I couldn't go back to him and say, you see, that work won an award. But sometimes you have to take risk. Of course, you always have to judge, which is your ability to take a risk. Okay, I can always, I'm in a good situation that, even if I decide to revise, I can probably find a job somewhere else. So I can afford to take risks. I'm not asking everybody to commit professional suicide. People need to weigh the risk and the return, okay, to do the analysis. But sometimes you have to do the right thing, even though it comes at a cost to yourself.
Yeah, that was an example of supporting your employee, your colleague, or not opposing your colleague and diluting the conflict of interest with your manager. So, apart from that, was there any other ethical dilemma that you face with with respect to technology, building technologies? Because you've been working as a scientist in most of these, so therefore, which incident has made you take this vocal stand and become, advocate for ethical technologies? I think somewhere something would have triggered and turned the course of your action. What would that be? One incident, sir.
This, I would tell you, this one incident was not personal, but it was when in 2011, Watson, an IBM system, competed and won the game of Jeopardy against human players. And another AI milestone was in 1997 when IBM system DeepMind and Deep Blue, sorry, not DeepMind, Deep Blue won against Kasparov in chess. But it won clearly by just brute force computing. It was able to build special hardware, was able to search the game tree deeper than any human beings can do. So even though it was a milestone in AI, nobody thought, oh, well, this machine is very intelligent. It just was a brute force search. But Watson was different. It was a game of understanding natural language, having common sense. It was a very impressive accomplishment. And it turned out it was a bit ahead of its time. IBM tried to commercialize it and failed. But it was an amazing accomplishment at the time. And this was when I started thinking, I've been doing research in AI, but it always looked like AI is very, very far from the future. And suddenly the fact that Watson won against two human players, I started thinking, wow, this AI business, maybe this is much closer than we think. And it so happened, just by coincidence, that about a year later, the deep learning revolution came about. Watson was not using deep learning yet. Deep learning just came started a year. Deep learning has been in the works for decades, but was a milestone. It performed in machine vision suddenly better in classifying images suddenly better than humans. That was around 2012, and that happened just a year after Watson, roughly a year after Watson, by coincidence. But in 2011, I started thinking this AI business is serious. Something, we are making huge progress in artificial intelligence. And then I started thinking, okay, what does it mean for humanity? This was, for me, the inflection point. I thought, okay, this is serious. This is really happening. What are the implications? What are the societal consequences? And I start thinking, for example, about automation and what does automation mean for the labor market. So when I go back at my own thinking, I go back to roughly about 12 years ago. Until then, I was just, full confession, I was just a nerd. I thought technology is good and more technology is better and most technologies is best. And I did not think much about responsibility and consequences. But about 12 years ago, my eyes opened up, and over time, I suddenly saw more and more consequences. Again, when you go back in the early 2010s, we did not yet see the damage from social media. But by a few years later, by 2016, we had we started the election when Donald Trump was elected as president of the United States of America. And then suddenly you saw the impact of social media in a big way. And so I can say that my eye fully opened over one incident, but they start opening in 2011 after Watson. And as time went on, I saw more and more adverse consequences. So the technology I love so much, and I've been a technologist now for 45 years, suddenly I realized it's good and bad, like many things in life. Okay, it's the good and the bad, and we have to find a better balance between them.
There you go. We understand the inflection point that you faced in your personal and professional life. especially when Watson won over humans in the chess competition, and subsequently the advancements in deep learning were taking shape, and there is greater evidence for consequences that are adverse. Fantastic, sir. That's what I was trying to understand from you. Now we'll open the mic for the members who have raised their hand. I'll request Haima Krutiveni to yes ask her question. Over to you, Haima.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. It's a deep privilege to associate with this webinar. It's a deep learning, of course. I have got so many questions when I was listening to you for the last 1 hour. I can't ask you all questions, but then let me try to be as simple as possible and try to know from you, what are the contemporary dilemmas that have encompassed present geopolitical wars, ethics, and technology? I repeat, sir, what are the contemporary dilemmas that have encompassed present geopolitical wars, ethics, and technology? And adding to that, would you please suggest the upcoming Generation I or Generation Z to grow up as ethical beings, because they have got already an exposure to be manipulative as far as possible. So we do not want to nurture a world with this sort of inputs to the younger generation. So what do you suggest for Generation I? How should they mold themselves to be ethical persons? Thank you, sir.
So we had just maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, there was a summit in the UK about AI safety. And the good thing about the summit was attended by many countries, because we all understand now that on many things we have to have international agreement on how to do certain things. We're all stuck together on this planet. And one thing that, I discovered at about age 16, science fiction. I fell in love in science fiction. And of course, one of the main stories of science fiction was always space travel. Going back, Jules Verne talked about, going to the moon. But what we do not realize, the moon is very, very, very close, okay? In terms of my own travel, in terms of how much mileage I do per year, it's about going to the moon. Okay. So the moon is just not very far away. The moon is very, very close. Mars, in contrast, is much, much, much farther, okay? Yes. So, people keep talking about going to Mars, humans going to Mars. I don't believe I will see it in my lifetime. And this whole idea of going to other planets and settling other planets, I have come to think that this is just a pipe dream, okay? Yeah. In fact, William Shatner, who played a key role in Star Trek, went out to space recently, maybe a year ago, and he saw planet Earth, and he started thinking, oh my goodness, we have to take care of this planet. Okay. And so certain things we must do it collectively. We cannot take over think about, we had one success with the ozone layer depletion, that we have agreed, we have put an international agreement, and we have saved the ozone layer. When it comes to climate change, we must do it collectively. Okay. I think AI, we have to have the good thing about the UK summit, and brought together many different countries. We need to think collectively together. Yeah. Because today the technology that comes from one country will affect life in another country. Okay. We need to sit down and think, how do we collectively regulate technology? We need to have some international agreements. The same way we have them on other issues, we need an agreement on AI regulation. It's not enough that each country regulates internally. We need to have some kind of an AI treaty. So this is the geopolitical aspect of this. Remind me now, what was the second question?
How would Gen I, Generation Z?
Gen I. So let me tell you, Yeah. So this was a kind of a personal story. So when my son went to elementary school, he was being teased. He would come home crying because he was teased by his classmate because he looked slightly different. Oh. And my wife went to the teacher and says, I think I can handle it. Yes. Just let me do one class. Give me one class with the students. She said, okay. And she went to that class and she talked to the students. She started talking to them and say, is there anyone here in the class that has ever been teased by other students? Mm-hmm. So at the beginning, everybody is quiet, but then one person raised their hand, and once one bold person raised their hand, somebody else raised their hand, and then somebody else raised their hand, and eventually pretty much the whole class raised their hand. And she said, okay, why don't we split into pairs? In each pair, everybody will take 5 minutes and they will tell their partner, what was it like to be teased? And they did that, and every child talked about, the children were about 8 years old. Every child talked about what was it like for them to be teased. And then they came back and they reported, and what they learned from this, that everyone got teased and everyone felt really bad about being teased. And then the teasing of my son stopped. Because what happened? All the children learned the most important principle in ethics, which is one, reciprocality, treat other people the way you'd like to be yourself treated, and empathy. And if you start with this reciprocality and empathy, and this you can teach, I said, my son was he was 8 years old at the time. And if you start teaching with this, then we can start having conversation with kids about these kind of issues. And we're not doing it. We've decided that values are only going to be taught at home, and so school is only about academic subject. And of course, when it comes to values, it's a bit tricky because we have divergence of values. For example, it turned out that 70% of people in the United States believe in social justice. But if you go and ask them, what does it mean? Then you'll see huge divergence. So we have a hard work ahead of us, but the fact that we did not talk much about values, we did not teach children about empathy, about social responsibility, that brought us to the world we are today, in which we said, the world we have today is the world that resulted from greed is good. So it's time for us to start thinking about how do we manage this planet in the best interest of the public good.
So you mean to say charity starts at home? Start at home,
start at school, and start with very simple things. Empathy, reciprocality.
Thank you so much, sir. I have many questions, but I don't want to ask. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you, sir. Sudhakar, sir, and Prasad, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks. The takeaway is reciprocality and empathy to be taught at a very young age in order to deal with ethics and make sure everyone is equally interested and practicing in ethics. That is one. Now I request Mr. Murali to raise his question.
Sir, can you hear my voice, sir?
Yes, I can hear your voice.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Murali. I'm from Velvat Systems Limited Company from Hyderabad. Thank you very much for joining. It's a wonderful opportunity to be with you, and thanks to ICFAI for this enablement. And what I actually have a request is, what are your views these days in some sectors? The employees in the organizations are doing jobs which is called as moonlighting. About 2 to 3 companies are working without having ethics. And can I request you how to build a value system where they should not do such things, no matter whatever the rules they actually imply in terms of process. But can I request you any thoughtful views on this account?
So building a value system is, I would say it's difficult. I mean, it's more difficult today when you have a distributed workforce. Okay, so people are working remotely, they have less time for interaction between them. I would say the most important thing that it's being deliberate, that you've raised this question. Okay, that's a start. You've raised the question about creating a culture of value. That means you're thinking about it. This is the first step, think about it. And now you need to understand in your own context, how can I do it? And first of all, much of it has to start from role models. Leadership has to act ethically and establish a culture of ethics. When I was working, before coming to RISE, I used to work for IBM Research. And IBM, the company said, we are a very, very ethical company. And for example, any ethics violation, you will be fired. Okay, it was just not acceptable. Okay, And everybody said that they are committed to that. That lasted for a few years. And then the companies faced major financial challenges. And then it became more difficult. It's easy to be ethical when it doesn't cost you money. When suddenly it costs money, then the company started compromising on ethics. And then I decided it was time to leave the company. But, you know, one, you have to make it a topic of discussion, because there's no right or wrong answers. You have to say, let's talk about this. What are our values? I'll give you an example. A young entrepreneur came to talk to me about a couple of years ago. He's starting a company, and he has a very simple question: how do I not become evil? And what he meant by that is that it's very famous. When Google was launched in the late 90s, 1998, one of the initial mottos of Sergey Brin and Larry Page was, "Do not be evil." And what do they mean by that? They were young people, they were idealistic. They thought they can bring a company, they can build a company. They do not want to become like the oil companies that said that profit over everything. Gradually, the slogan, "Do not be evil," from the front page, it kind of went down and down to the bottom page, to the appendix, and eventually just disappeared. Because it's very hard to live in our capitalistic system, market-driven system, and put ethics above profits. And so he came to ask me, what do I do so it won't happen I'm starting a company. What do I do so it won't happen to me? And I said, the most important thing, you have to discuss it every time. You cannot just let it be there. You can't just say, I'm ethical, and then move on, forget about it. You have to, every time you have a board meeting, you say, okay, are we living up to our values? Are we willing to pay the price? Whenever you hire people, you do this kind of, you introduce people to the company. You talk about ethics. Whenever you talk to your suppliers, you talk about ethics. This cannot be something that you just declare once and say. You have to declare it daily. Okay, just to use a slightly political example, Jews have been longing to go back to Zion and Jerusalem for 2,000 years, and 3 times a day they say a prayer. The prayer says, "And God, please take us back to Zion and Jerusalem." 3 times a day, every day for the last 2,000 years, Jews have been praying, "We want to go back to Zion and Jerusalem." I'm just using it not to make a political argument, but an example of, if you want to have something important, you have to make it, it has to be something that you live daily and not something that you put on the book and then you forget about it, okay? The Jewish prayer says, if I forget Jerusalem, then my right hand can dry away and fall off, okay? If you decide that something is important to you, you have to practice and refresh your practice on a regular basis. Otherwise, it will just wither away.
Great. I think it's a fantastic point that you mentioned, sir. If you really believe in something, for example, in ethics, you need to keep discussing, you need to pin it up, and in every single meeting, you'll have to talk about it and place ethics above profits, and there's no other way. You will have to live by it every single day, so that
imagine you're CEO of a company, and you have the meeting with all your vice presidents, and you said, please, when you come to this annual meeting, each one of you should have a story to tell the board how we put ethics above business. Imagine that this is the culture where they brag how they put ethics above business. That will be a very different culture.
The culture of ethics, by placing it on each of the vice presidents or the senior members in your team to narrate a story, how you did it yourself to actually place ethics above profits. Amazing. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. We'll quickly go to the other members in the attendees who wanted to actually speak to you. Ms. Malabika, you can raise your question, please.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Professor Moshe. Before I come to the question, I have to accept that your talk was really very interesting. It was more like a storytelling where you had taken us through the entire chronology of digital revolution. And yes, just to add on and to reinforce what Sudhakar Rao sir has said, we would really be happy and appreciate if you can kindly share your PPTs, your deck of PPTs.
Yeah,
It
I
was
will.
really
I will.
awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words, and I
Yes,
promise
sir.
I'll share my deck. Yeah.
It is our privilege to listen from you. And my question, well, it's quite a simple question, I guess. So usually, at least in the Indian context, and maybe it will be true for other countries as well, since childhood, we are taught that we should not be too nosy or intrude into other person's lives. And the same teaching we give it to our kids as well, who are supposed to be the Gen Zs and Gen Is, as our preceding member has asked the question. Now, with the coming of technology, if we talk about technology giants like Google, and not only those big companies, even with the simple CRM softwares, each and every data of every individual is captured in the system. Where we have visited last month, where we have what food we ate, what all are our preferences, likings, dislikes, what we call as the digital footprint, just like carbon footprint we have been talking about. So my question is that with the coming of technology, is it that the basic definition of ethics needs to be slightly modified or overhauled? Because what we understood as right and wrong apparently seems to be fairly right, or it's very right in today's world. So like in case my question is not that very clear, to cite my personal example, I have also faced several ethical dilemmas. Like when for my elder child, I used to devote a lot of time because I used to be at home. But once I started working, I couldn't devote that much of time to my younger one. And obviously, she started developing the habit of being hooked to the laptop or the whatever gadget. And somehow I used to console that it's fair enough because I am using my time productively, and I know that she is also not looking into something which is not healthy as such. But at the same time, we know that somewhere that sense of guilt is still cropping up some corner of my mind. So this sort of ethical dilemmas, is it that it is something which is common and which cannot be avoided because of the digital revolution? It is something which is ethics itself. We need to revisit the concept of ethics.
So, much of happening. So clearly the what happened in the world in terms of privacy is unprecedented in terms of how much this company know about us. And how did it happen? It happened because there is let me mention there is a famous Greek paradox, ancient Greek paradox, classical Greek paradox. It's called the sand heap paradox. And the sand heap paradox says if you put in front of you 1 grain of sand, it's not a heap. You add another grain of sand, it's not a heap. If you have some sand and it's not a heap, and you add 1 grain, it will not make it a heap. But you and I know if you put enough grains of sand, eventually it will become a heap. So what happened is you click on Facebook like, and you've given Facebook a grain sand of information about yourself. And you think it's just 1 click. But the answer is there are lots of clicks. And eventually Facebook has a picture of you that may be more than you know about yourself. But it's invisible to you because it's 1 click at a time. It's invisible to you how much information you give them. So notice the asymmetry. They know all about you. You know nothing about them. And just to show the hypocrisy of Silicon Valley, Mark Zuckerberg said privacy is dead. But he bought a house in Palo Alto. And he bought a house in Palo Alto. He also bought all the house around him because he wanted more privacy. He doesn't want nosy neighbors. So privacy is dead for us, but not for him. So when they declare that privacy is over, it's just self-serving. So the answer is privacy is over because we as a society let it happen. Unthinkingly, we never realize this is happening. Unknowingly, because we have no idea how much information they have. And I mentioned again the shadow legal system that enable all of this. Part of the issue is that they are covered by this invisible contracts. If we nullify this contract, suddenly you can say this is a violation of my privacy. Right now, you have given all this information for them to free, and the license said they're allowed to use this information. They're allowed to sell this information. You have given them the license. The contract that you have with these companies, give them the license to use this information. We first need to reclaim. We need to bring the shadow legal system into the open and reclaim our rights. They should be liable. We should have privacy. Okay. Now, imagine. I mean, just to give you a sense. Suppose somebody wants me to expose 1 pixel from my body anywhere. 1 pixel. I say it's 1 pixel. Who cares? I'm willing to be naked and expose 1 pixel. What happens if this pixel accumulate? I'm not ready to have my naked picture. I don't look as good naked. I'm not ready to have my naked picture on the internet. But essentially, if you give 1 pixel at a time, eventually your picture is out there, figuratively speaking. So, but it's invisible to us. So we need to reclaim our privacy. And I think we need to put the laws in place. The only way to get back, take away the power from this corporation that right now are wielding way too much power. I think I'm not anti-technology, okay? I mean, technologies enable me to give you now an address, okay? And you are all over India, and I'm sitting here in my home office, and we're having this wonderful conversation. This wouldn't be impossible without technology. So technology, in some sense, is wonderful, but we need to reclaim control of what role technology is playing in our life. And one of the things we need to reclaim is privacy. Then we can have a debate about privacy standards. But right now, we have no say. The corporations are dictating privacy standards. And you have no idea what the standards are because you have no idea what are in these contracts.
Right. So I believe like digital technology has become ubiquitous, but the people are still ignorant about how to protect their privacy. It's
very, very hard. I can tell you personally, I try to avoid smartphone as long as I could. But at some point, you could just not I mean, right now, it's impossible to live life in the United States. I wouldn't say impossible. In China, it is impossible. It's impossible to live life without a smartphone because, you know, you go there, you go to a restaurant, you pay using WeChat. It's impossible to live life without it. United States, it's possible.
Even in India, sir.
It's extremely difficult to live without this technology. One can say the company would like to tell you that this is your personal choice. But the answer is that at some point it stops becoming your personal choice. Life, they're so embedded in our lives now. You know, I make a doctor appointment. The doctor send me a text and I have to click on the link to confirm my appointment. I could say, no, I don't do that. But that's the way life is now. Okay, you cannot go to a small island in the Pacific and avoid technology now. It's everywhere.
Not possible. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for the answer. Thank you. Thank you, Sudhakar Rao, sir. Thank you, Prasad.
Thank you. So very, very quickly, we'll move to Dr. Shantanu Roy for his question. Over to you, Dr. Shantanu.
Thank you, sir. The short question I have is, when we take care of our security, national security or other securities, then we deliberately enter into somebody's life because that's part of the existence. So police does it. If there is a crisis on our borders, then we of course do that. So there are this may not be ethical, but that's required for our own security or for the security of our population. So if the criminals are indulging in unethical practices, the government will have to take care of those things. I mean, how do you demarcate? I mean, that was my question. Like, how to draw the line between what is ethical? In some respects, it becomes very difficult because you have to go inside their mobile phones and try to see what they are sending, what kind of messages they're sending, because that will be required for our national security or for the security of our own population within the country itself.
Look, the sixth commandment, you look at the 10th commandment, the sixth commandment is thou shalt not kill. And I believe that every culture in the world use this as a holy principle. Human lives are incredibly important. We are saying you're not allowed to kill. In every human culture, it's a crime to kill. But We make, it's not black and white. We make exceptions. For example, we usually say you're allowed to kill in self-defense, okay? And some countries, for example, Texas has death penalty for certain heinous crimes. I'm personally against death penalty, but it is legal in many countries, in many states. We can debate it, but the point is that we all countries agree that at least you're allowed to fight war in self-defense again. So the concept of just war. So even though we have this edict, thou shalt not kill, it's not black and white. We have to go and say, okay, yes, in general, it's not allowed to kill, but let's think of what we call exigent circumstances, where we said, well, for example, defend your own life. You're allowed to kill to defend your own life. And we debate it and we say, what does it mean? How urgent does this threat have to be? It has to be clear and present danger. We develop a whole legal system to try to say if somebody is charged of killing someone else and they claim self-defense, they have to prove that it was a genuine self-defense. It's not black and white. Okay. The same thing with national security. National security is, yes, we all are entitled. One of the first role of government is to protect its citizens. And unfortunately, we live in a universe where there are people who are willing to harm the citizens of another country. And it's the role of government to defend us. Now, the same, we can ask questions, at what price? And that's a delicate thing to do. It's a topic of ongoing debate. So, for example, the US Constitution protects us, the Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable search. Unreasonable search. Well, what is unreasonable search? That's a matter of eternal, you pass laws that try to regulate what is unreasonable search. And when does the state interest overwhelm this? And when can they do it? And it's a matter of the court. So, for example, in the United States, we have even a special court that if you want to listen to phone call, you want to do eavesdropping in the national interest, the government cannot just do it. They have to go to this special secretive court. And this is not open court like most courts. This is closed court, but they have to convince these special judges that there is a state interest in doing eavesdropping. So at the minimum, you need to develop a governance system, because we all know one of the most important principle about humanity is power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. We all learn it. It's all true. It's true. None of us is immune from this disease, the corruption by power. And so if you give governments too much power, they become corrupt. Okay, because governments are made of human beings, and human beings are flawed. We all know this. Many of the biblical stories about how flawed human beings are. It's just a reality we have to live with. And so we try to create structures that would limit the damage. Okay, that if you look at the United States as a government system, one is they have separation of powers, so no single branch will become too powerful. We don't want president who is too powerful. We don't want courts that are too powerful. And it's something that we keep, it's not something you do once and you are done. You have to keep making sure that power is circumscribed. And that's why democracy is not just the rule of the majority, because then you give the majority too much power. Partly it's about also constraining the power of the majority, because the majority should not have too much power. Even though we live in majority rule, it's not super absolute rule. Okay, we try to ensure in the constitution rights of a minority. So the answer is there is in 1963, about 6 years ago, John F. Kennedy came to Rice University, and he gave a famous speech about we should go to the moon. He made it a national goal to go to the moon. And he said, we choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, because it is hard. He wanted to put it as a national challenge. And I said the same about ethics. We choose to do ethics, not because it is easy, because it is hard. Behaving ethically is hard. And we talked about giving up profits for doing ethics. But even deciding what is ethical and what is not ethical is not black and white. What is self-defense? We have to decide what is self-defense. What power should we give governments? And how do we regulate the power of governments? You know, how do you regulate the regulator? How do you make sure the regulator doesn't have too much power? All of this is why, remember what Churchill said about democracy. It's a terrible system, except for, it's a war system except for all other systems. And in the US Constitution, if the first paragraph that I mentioned, they talk about a more perfect union. They knew that when it comes to human project, there is no perfect union. They talk about a more perfect union. And the more perfect is an ongoing project. We always need to work on becoming more perfect. It's never over. We never says, okay, we are done. We have the best solution. We never have the best solution. So this question you're raising about the power of the state are very, very central questions when we think about democracy, about governance, but the social contract between citizens and governments. And we give government tremendous amount of power. We give government license to be coercive. You know, I mean, we have police, and the police come and arrest me and put me in jail, and we have given the government this power. And the reason we have given them this power is in the public because we believe it's for the public good. And we continue, you know, we have to thread the needle all the time. It's not that we do it once and you're done. You thread one needle and then there is another needle and there's another needle, another needle. It's an ongoing quest.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that detailed explanation of how much power is to be given to the state and where do we stop these intrusions. I think there's no clear answer. We need to work on balancing every time. And if it is in the interest of public good, yes, we should welcome it. But by separation of powers, I think we have systems and methodologies to reduce that absoluteness, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Over the last 120 minutes, we have had a fantastic conversation that I must confess. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Moshe Vardi has made a compelling exploration of the ethical dimensions that are intertwined with the world of technology. He talked about the imperatives for technologies to recalibrate their approach by advocating for a collective commitment, not just individual, not just across corporations, but across nations, a collective commitment to ethical behavior. And he has talked about a paradigm shift in how technologists will have to engage with their work. The luminaries that he talked about often walked away with awards, but have not taken responsibility. There's no accountability for the damage that they would have done. He has also painted a roadmap for a more ethically conscious future, urging all of us and the tech community to embrace the most important role in shaping positive societal impact. Sir, over the last 2 hours, you have helped us understand many things. The 4 decades of chronicling of technological revolution that you talked about, you interspersed with how political paralysis that we witnessed, or democracy being in danger at different points in the history, has moved it to cognitive polarization that we have witnessed. And then the rise of internet and the compelling need to commercialize internet has actually changed the gears towards more adverse impacts of what was beginning to be customized, targeted advertising, going towards having no privacy. So the fantastic example that you have given towards the end, that 1 pixel at a time, you begin to surrender your privacy. I think there is a greater need for us to reclaim our rights about privacy and many other things. I was also impressed with some of the principles that you believed in and practiced, and the observations about the greed, the rising greed or the creeping greed syndromes across the world, across corporations, and that is the biggest fallacy. Individuals and organizations will have to focus on the larger good, move away from the narrower interests to the interests of the society, and people working in deep tech will have to have a deeper sense of social responsibility. And I think when these are practiced, we will we will try and put an end to, or we mitigate the adverse effects like addiction to devices. We are being unaware of the carbon footprint that we are leaving, the climate impact that we are making. And I think in our urge to maximize convenience, we are compromising on the ill effects. And that's where you said, to continuously make it aware and then accept that there is damage, and then start conversing how to limit it, how to actually minimize the damage. I think that's where you have drawn out. And one more important thing is about the legal systems, how the state will have to come in for regulation rather than the shadow legal system written by the corporate lawyers, rather than laws written by the legislators or the legislative bodies. I think that's what you have pitched for, so that we can put an end through what is called clicks through contracts. I think in our urge to comply, urge to follow several apps and the softwares that we use, we quickly click on it and then we accept the contract, and then we surrender our rights, and we actually empower them with their what is called immunity for liability. They do not have any liability, but only the users and the consumers have all the liability, and they have their own pitfalls that they dug for themselves. Another important flag is to watch out for the window dressing of ethics, the eye washing that we see for ethics, which actually capture the web pages of various organizations. And sometimes it is part of the rhetoric and discussion and narrative. But eventually, when it comes to practice, when it is a decision between making a profit vis-a-vis taking an ethical stand, I think that's the real test where the leaders and organizations have failed most of the times. And that's what is desired much in this area. The regulatory science and regulation is like giving birth to children and nurturing. I think when we nurture our families, nurture our societies, we all tend to become responsible, but societies will have to hold these biggies for accountable, for their accountability, and organizations also should hold them for accountability. Several important pearls of information coming from a computer scientist and a mathematician of 4 decades or more than 4 decades is a great eye-opener for us. It has been a wonderful conversation with the queries coming from our participants on the current issues like the FTX, like deep faking that is happening, like moonlighting, and the culture of ethics, how it is so difficult for us to build. I think we need to keep making this effort and keep moving in the direction of reclaiming our rights, and very, very elaborate discussion of how much power that we concede to state. I think it's a fine balance that we'll have to arrive at. Wonderful, sir. I think long after this conversation, when we go home, probably before sleeping, these words will keep reeling, crossing our mind many times. That is the thought-provoking discussion that you have kickstarted this evening. The 127th leadership conversation has ended in great style with a lot of fodder, a lot of food for thought. And I'm sure in the days to come, and in the way we look at technology, in the way we take any action, we'll become little more responsible in smaller, bigger acts and decisions that we take, not just in technology, but across all walks of life, across all decisions that leaders and powerful people take, both in private and public life. Thank you so much, sir. On behalf of everyone here and on behalf of the ICFAI group of educational institutions, I would like to thank you for your time, energy, and expertise in helping us understand how one can try and become an ethical technologist and what are the implications for all of us. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for giving this opportunity. Dhanyavad.
Dhanyavad, wonderful. I also want to mention this Dhanyavad to Professor Arun Kumar Saini, our esteemed colleague and Dean of ICFAI Tech at Jaipur. It is because of Professor Arun Kumar Saini that we have had this contact with you. It's a brilliant contact, most valuable, and I want to thank entire ICFAI University Jaipur and ICFAI Tech Jaipur for enabling this connect. I request Professor Saini to give more connects like this and make sure that we have such wonderful and fruitful conversations in the days and weeks to come. Thank you, Arun.
Goodbye and good evening to you all.
Thank you, sir, and good day to you. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you on November 24th about how we can have a different kind of journey into the spiritual world. We are inviting the respectful Daji, Dr. Kamlesh D. Patel from the Heartfulness Institute, which is in Hyderabad, to speak on the power of meditation and how we can actually become leaders in our own right by meditation and by influencing people through meditation, through heartfulness and things like that. So do join us at 6:30 p.m. on November 24th. And till then, keep reading more about Professor Moshe Vardi and his long list of works, his debates and his talks that are available on the internet. And wish you greater knowledge and the power to reflect. And do remember not to surrender your right to privacy, and keep working at the balance of how do we maximize our convenience and at the same time protect our rights. With this, look forward to seeing you next week as well. Until then, have a happy weekend and good night.